Beginning in June, I will be gathering 5 or 6 folks who feel called to live this next solar cycle as if it were their last. Rooted in the question of what truly matters when we live with full awareness of our impermanence, this journey invites an honest and humble reckoning, a deepening into life through heartfelt intimacy, and a fierce, loving embrace of fear, grief, and praise. More than just a program, it's a commitment to walk with death as an ally and live aligned with what is most essential, held in the company of an intimate group of kindred spirits. This is a virtual group initiation into the heart of impermanence. As the months unfold, we'll deepen our intimacy with life, tend to what remains unfinished, and culminate in a ritual death and rebirth. Each month will include 2 group sessions and at least 1 one-on-one session with me for each participant. I know this is going to be a truly transformative threshold experience, and I'm so excited to welcome those who feel called to join us. I will share more about this opportunity in the coming weeks, but if your curiosity is sparked now, feel free to reach out and we'll set up an insight call to explore if this year-long container, a year to live, is a good fit for you. I'm also hosting another virtual event on May 31st. While I'm still confirming guest speakers and final details, the event is titled Rise and Revitalize, an online gathering to enliven and embrace the wild bloom of becoming. I've created a preliminary event page so you can find that and links to everything else I've mentioned through the show notes. Lastly, I've started a Substack publication called Hearth Woven. I still haven't posted anything just yet, but the first essay will be out soon. And Hearth Woven is to be a space for essays, poetry, podcast episodes, and bonus content, including extended conversations from this project eventually. It'll be a slow burn at first, but I'd love to have you there as an early subscriber. For now, everything will be free, and down the line, I'll likely add a modest paywall for certain offerings to help sustain the creative energy behind all of this. And now, let's turn our attention to today's conversation. Welcome to Wild Heart Revival, a gathering place for heartfelt conversations and stories as pathways of renewal and revival. I'm your host, Tay Tayari, and today's guest is Nadia Ramo. Nadia invites us into the living ecosystem of her healing arts practice, one rooted in reciprocity, embodied listening, and a sincere relationship with the more than human world. In our conversation, a vision of health is illuminated, not as the absence of illness or the turning away from symptoms, but as a realignment with the deeper intelligence of nature. We explore her unique weaving of Indigenous and Chinese medicine, her attunement to the meta patterns of the natural world, and her personal journey navigating her own serious diagnoses by turning toward the grounded guidance of intuition, body, and earth. Through rich stories and reflections, Nadia offers a vision of healing as a relational orientation, an orientation of reverence, deepened perception, and sincere communication with the plant nations of Earth. Dr. Nadia Ramo practices Chinese medicine and herbalism. She further studies the teachings of herbalism through field experience, sitting with plants and nature. Nadia reminds her patients and teaches her students to remember their own intuitive intelligence in order to receive teachings from nature and restore balance in the body. At one point in the conversation, I share an incredible story from Stephen Buhner. I had mentioned that I would record it separately and add it to the end of the episode, but instead I decided to weave it in right at the moment it came up. I don't think it disrupts the flow. In fact, I feel that it adds a sweetened depth. That said, if you'd prefer to skip it, feel free to fast forward about 18 minutes until the conversation picks back up. If you are new to the show, you might like to know that I am a threshold counselor with an online practice dedicated to supporting wanderers, wanderers, and edgewalkers. I offer individual, couples, and group counsel, as well as support around death and dying. To learn more, visit my website through the link in the show notes. And know that I also offer free insight calls, which provide a risk-free opportunity for us to connect, explore our alignment, and determine if we're a good fit to walk alongside each other during a pivotal time in your life. I'm generally open to connecting via email and video chat if you feel naturally drawn to do so, whether for guidance, curiosity, collaboration, or any other meaningful reason. So feel free to reach out at any time. And if you haven't yet, I invite you to subscribe to Wild Heart Revival on your preferred podcast platform, and know that your likes, comments, ratings, and shares are not only deeply appreciated, they are vital for supporting the organic growth of these heartfelt conversations and stories. Now, let's open our hearts, stretch our perceptual capacities in playful, creative ways as we warmly welcome the wonderful Nadia Ramo. I was looking over your website just before getting on the call here, and I was struck by a few things you said there, and I hope to weave them in a good way throughout our conversation. But one of the things you say right at the beginning of your site is that this is an ecosystem of offerings intended to bring you into harmony with your body, mind, and the planet. And I love that you use the word ecosystem there, because I can feel your orientation toward life-affirming alignment. Mm-hmm. And so it makes me wonder if you could describe the felt sense of that ecosystem you're speaking to, and like what sustains this living system of the healing arts that you're developing in your life. And how do you hold the complexity of the various lineages that you're connected to? You know, Chinese medicine, indigenous wisdom, clinical science. And yeah, how do you do that without fragmentation or dilution? So those are a lot of questions, but you can get the sense, it's more of like a space I'd like to enter into with you.
Yeah, totally. And I feel like you highlighting the word ecosystem was kind of right on, because one ecosystem is super complex. There's weather, there's seasons, there's different species of plants, and there's competition and yielding and pollination. So much is happening. And I feel like part of the beauty of indigenous wisdom, Chinese medicine wisdom, is that it's anchored in observation of nature. And so through observing nature, that is where the medicine and the access even to the more shamanic realms comes from, just the observation and the alignment with nature. So as someone that wants to step into, being this practitioner and valuing myself, I really struggle with consumerism. I really struggle with asking people for money in exchange for kind of just telling them something that they already know deep inside of them. Like, it's nothing new that I'm bringing forward. It's just, I'm reminding. And so I struggle a little bit with, like, buy my offering, but more so it's like, okay, actually, how can we look at this like we're planting a garden together, and I'm not just like giving you a fish, I'm teaching you how to fish. And so like, I feel that part of what the reverence for what I offer is like this engagement as you're stepping into this ecosystem that you get to co-create with me and forever be a part of. And that is very much rooted in, I pretty much will use, my roots of knowing and understanding herbalism comes from the Chinese medical paradigm and perspective, which views herbalism in a very systematic and brilliant way. And also there is elements of the psycho-spiritual and emotional too, which I find indigenous wisdom to be much more aligned with the psycho-spiritual elements. And so, but there's a lot of overlap too with how, like, if the liver is related to anger and frustration and resentment in Chinese medicine, and there will be a berry in the California ecosystem is kind of where I studied most of the indigenous native herbalism here. So there'll be like sour flavor addresses the liver. And so there's like a sour berry around here. And they very much, the Shumash elder that I studied with, she talked about how this berry really addresses anger and frustration and resentment. And it helps you move a lot of stuck emotions, which is exactly what the liver does in Chinese medicine. And the sour flavor, so Schisandra berry or something like hawthorn berry, which has that sour quality, it has really similar qualities, and they're both bright red berries. They both are sour. And so there's kind of, you start to see these patterns that are universal. And when it is rooted in the observation of nature, it all just starts to kind of like, overlap with each other. And it's all coming from the same place.
Yeah, that was well said. I think one of the sad symptoms of today in the modern culture that we are part of, even though of course we have our subcultures that are necessarily a core of our lives, but the overculture, there's this sad symptom of like just kind of having this false sense of being separate from the flows and forces of nature in the wild. And a lot of us are talking about this, but the thing that you just said is like, there's patterns in nature and you are a part of that patterning. And there's meta patterns that if you can come into intimacy with them and learn them and feel them and be able to track them, you can follow those meaning threads all throughout the system, really.
Right.
And find the magic in medicine that's for you, that maybe you don't know this particular plant in this new ecosystem, but because you understand certain patterns of the plant nations, you can maybe have some kind of ground to meet that plant on. That isn't just ignorance, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it starts to translate wherever you go.
Yeah. So I just would love to hear a little bit more about this, like the rootedness that you tend into a deeper knowing that allows you to sustain this practice, this evolving, growing practice that you have amidst the increased fragmentation or just kind of the chaotic elements of today.
I find that coming back to simplicity, coming back to the basics is super important. It's funny because when you're learning elements of Chinese medicine, there are certain phrases that since day one in school you hear over and over again. And so then as a trained practitioner, you start to like kind of be like, oh, that boring phrase, like, even something like move, like if there's qi stagnation, and then if there's qi stagnation, the protocol or the treatment principle is move the qi. And like, it's kind of this really basic thing. And as a practitioner, you feel like you want to, the Western paradigm of these complex diagnoses start to make you want to feel like a more evolved practitioner. So if I tell you, hey, you have qi stagnation, but then a Western medical doctor is like, oh, you actually have, really severe colitis, and your digestion is really like doing this and this and this. And so you get that Western sort of understanding on the biochemical reasoning of why your body is doing what you're doing. But from my perspective, I'm just like, well, you have a lot of stasis, and we look at that as like a lot of stuck emotions, something that you're doing is blocked. So my treatment is going to be moving things and getting things moving. And what are we going to do? Like you have obstruction in your meridians, you have obstruction in your bowels. We need to give you herbs and a treatment principle that's going to move the obstruction. I'm not going to call it colitis. I'm not going to riddle you in this concept of a diagnosis, because today you're showing up to me with very clear stagnation. And so we need to move that stagnation. And once we move that stagnation in 2 days, come back and let's see where you're at from there. And so, but what the Western paradigm, I think, just like you get this wild diagnosis, and then pharmaceuticals, which could be helpful, but a lot of times it's more for like it's treating more of like the branch, not the root. And yeah, so I feel like really as a practitioner, focusing more on patterns, how your patient is showing up that day, versus like what's the Western diagnosis, is going to automatically just simplify the angle. Like I was given really severe diagnoses at the age after I got my acupuncture license, and I had like an autoimmune form of digestive issues. I had a blood disorder that was looking like bone cancer. And like, if you were to look at what my diagnosis was, it looked like I was going to die within a few years. They wanted to do bone marrow transplants on me and all the things. Like low grade chemo, this wild autoimmune medication. And so I just kind of went more of the route of like, okay, well, how am I showing up today? What are my symptoms showing up today? And going to my teachers at the time, my acupuncture teachers, and like, okay, well, you actually have this like kidney yang thing that's and like this dampness that's encumbering your spleen. And so then we like took herbs for the kidney, we took herbs for the spleen, and then we started to harmonize things. And then I just started doing some combo, which was pretty radical on my system, and just sort of was like a big reset for me. But over time, my symptoms started to subside and my blood labs weren't quite changing. So I still, like under the Western paradigm, was like very sick, but I was showing up more healthy. And so it took more time to like, for me to really trust in like the plant worlds, the animal world, to keep guiding me forward. And eventually my symptoms were just gone and my blood labs were starting to slowly change. And it took another like couple years for the blood labs to actually really catch up. And the doctors were even just kind of like, whoa, what happened? But for me, just being my own sort of healer at the time, I was just focusing on like, okay, well, this made me feel better, so I'm going to keep following this thread. And so that was a big teaching for me, is how I practice. It's not getting caught up on just the diagnosis and the labeling and like the figuring it out energy. It's more so just treating like the pattern as it's coming up.
Yeah. Yes. Wow. So much richness in that, really. That's such deep, important, vital wisdom. I don't know if you know, but I do counsel work with folks. And at this point, it's mostly just, whatever, talk therapy, you could call it, though it feels so much more deep than that.
Yeah.
And like, I'll give one example in specific because it feels really aligned with this orientation. I had this client and we came together because she was suicidal and like really, really in the deep, dark, thick of life. And she had been diagnosed for many years for different things, like since 6 years old on ADD medication, and then eventually put on, antipsychotics because of being blasted open from a friend committing suicide. And so you get the understanding, right? Like she was really dealing with a lot of deep psycho-emotional, spiritual pain. And the biomedical model just medicated her and diagnosed her, right? Because in order to medicate, you have to diagnose. And so she was carrying these labels and this sense that you're either okay or you're not. So you're at point A where you're sick, you're diagnosed, and we're going to give you the medication, and at some point you're going to like be better. And so it's this kind of like disjointed journey that they kind of give to people and gave to her. Coming to me, I don't see things like that. I see it very much like how you're describing, like what's happening today. This is a process. There's patterns, there's mythic flows and forces that are alive and emergent in the now. And we spent about half a year together, and it would seem on the outside that she wasn't getting better, right? She showed up, she still wanted to kill herself lots of days, was super sick, had akathisia, and I just stayed with the process. And eventually, it's like I could sense that the patterns were unraveling, they were being rewritten, reworked, composted. even though she couldn't sense that a lot of the time. And we just stayed with it. And now she's like not suicidal, no akathisia, starting to wean off of her medication. And if at some point in that half a year I looked and I went, well, she's not getting better. She still has all of her symptoms. So what we're doing isn't working, you know, then I could have given up on the process. And I guess I bring this up because it's physical, it's emotional, it's psychological, it's spiritual, that these are deep intertwined processes. And when we're not slow and sensitive and humble to the deep time that sometimes is needed to tend to these patterns, to rework them, we're oftentimes selling ourselves short. And I think that's where the biomedical model fails often for people, is that it doesn't recognize soul, essentially, is how I would say it. So
Yeah.
how do you see that? I mean, I know you just explained, but what comes up for you in that?
Yeah, I mean, I really agree with just sort of that slower pace of healing that, you know, our culture has just the instant gratification culture of take the pill and it'll all go away is just completely obliterated just the essence of like what healing truly means. Because one thing that I noticed when I had my digestive diagnosis is the doctor never asked me once what my diet was like. So you got a patient that comes in with chronic colitis, and it's not like if they could be drinking Coke or something every day or having pizza every day, and there's not even an awareness. It's like, here, take this pill. So there people like, I feel like the Western paradigm is just like, well, we're giving you the solution, take this thing. And like, that's, and then of course there's just the monetary, like running of all of that up too. That's obscuring a lot of the intentionality of treatment. But really what has to happen is that the patient or the person that is imbalanced needs to find balance. And finding balance doesn't just require going and seeing your doctor or going and seeing your counselor or going and seeing any healer. It's actually, what are you doing every day, and how are you showing up every single day, and what are the choices that you're making every single day? And obviously doing things like therapy or counseling or seeing some sort of practitioner that's bringing you more aligned with your truth will help you integrate into making better choices. But I just really feel like yeah, like for me, a symptom is a language of my body asking me to change something. And so it's really, you know, and even if that's mental, emotional, you know, like, okay, I'm getting really anxious about something, like something needs to shift, or I need to tend to myself in a certain way right now to like find this balance again. And it's a lifestyle adjustment, but the beauty of the lifestyle adjustment is it brings you into more alignment of who you actually are. And I feel like that responsibility is just, it's rarely undermined in the Western medical paradigm. It's also not talked about at all. I mean, even when COVID was happening, the doctors never, or the mainstream media never once was like, oh, like maybe go take some zinc or get some vitamin D. Like there was never like these basic recommendations that have proved time and time again that like boost your immune system. Like you should probably still exercise, do some like deep breaths. And like, instead it was like, wear a mask, be scared, get on your computer. Like, so, you know, it's just it was such a representation of how, our culture views like, views illness as this thing to fear and not this thing to embrace for change. You know?
And it's really kind of insidious because it's like we're constantly being trained and told and supported in turning away from the truth that's being revealed in our experience. You know, it's like, oh, you're sick. Whoa, let's as quickly as we can redirect this, turn away from the symptom so that you're acceptable again in a way, like so that you fit the mold of the society, you know, and so you can like get back into work and get back into, you know, being an active participant in society. But the thing is like you're saying, the symptom is actually the wisdom. The symptom is the medicine. It's the invitation to go deeper, to feel deeper. The meaning flows that are very, very present. Like that is the emergent intelligence of your body or your psyche in that moment. And when you turn away from it, you're just really just pushing it into the shadows, and we know what happens in that way. So it's really this kind of shift in perception, right? Like how you perceive symptoms, how you perceive felt sense experience. How do you see that in your work with folks? Do you feel like you're consistently working with, supporting people in shifting the way in which they perceive themselves and the living world and how they interact?
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I feel like building a positive relationship with their body, no matter what their body is showing them, even if it is, yeah, it's something as simple as back pain or something like, okay, well, your back pain's showing up because it wants you to tend to it. Is that, movement, or are you moving too much? And where, like, and doing kind of a psychosomatic drop into the point of the body that is like yelling a little bit or asking for
Mm,
some attention. And so dropping people in usually instantly, once you get someone with some deep breaths and dropping into that location in the body, like they get the information right away what it needs.
mm,
Doesn't need a heating pad and to lay down, or doesn't need you to get up and go move and stretch. And yeah, we have that internal wisdom, and the body is so loud. We just have to get out of the mind for a second and tune
mm,
into what the body is saying. So I practice that a lot in my sessions. And I also, yeah, I mean, even doing remote sessions with people, or just kind of working with a patient that is constantly in their head. It's just like about dropping them into the body. And I find that they just get their own inner wisdom of what to do and how to navigate it.
mhm.
Yeah.
And so what about supporting people in connecting more deeply with the natural world as well, like
Yeah.
the ecosystem outside of their body and outside of their city or civilized, like human ecosystem? Do you really focus on that at all? Because I know you work a lot with plants, and
Mhm.
uh, the plants are uh, so they're so potent in their capacity to remind us of the living intelligence that we carry in our own bodies,
Yeah.
like showing us how to re-inhabit our earthliness. Um,
Mhm.
but of course, not just plants, like landscapes. So I'm
Yeah.
curious how or if you incorporate that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I have like an array, especially because most of my acupuncture clients have been more in the Los Angeles County recently. So I definitely work with some patients that are on the grind and they just want to feel good. They want to feel better. Uh, and I constantly am finding myself reminding them to like take their shoes off and put their feet directly on the earth,
Mm,
even if it's for 5 breaths. And really using that as a prescription for people, because there are some people that just are resistant to taking herbs, or it's just not like possible that they're going to actually do that every day. And so I do always kind of find a way of like, well, what are you stopping? What are you doing to co-regulate your nervous system? Like, go find a tree, really make a point to just stop. And whether they're doing that or not, I don't really know. But I
mm,
have kind of started to refine my practice, and my patient sort of, yeah, like the ensemble of my patients are definitely people that are much more receptive to going deeper and wanting to access more of the natural world, and want to advocate for Earth and want to listen to Earth. And whether they're CEOs of companies, or doing like kind of big public figures, are they taking a stand in something that I believe in? And
mm,
so and can I help support them in taking a stand in something that is good?
mhm.
So I've been refining my practice. I've been in like a bit of a refining my practice, because it was nice to get to LA and make money and work with all sorts of different types of
Sure.
people.
Yeah.
But yeah, I got to the point of like, oh, I really want to align with who I am working with. And so yeah,
Mhm.
then I also have like the role of being a teacher, and then students that want to learn plant wisdom more. And so then there is just kind of transmitting that just deeper curiosity of the plant world and helping people see and realize. I have had patients where I prescribe them raw herbs and they feel radical difference, or I even having a patient work with something like blue lotus and they
Mm.
have beautiful visionary dreams, and certain things too, like blue lotus can also increase the libido, and so then their like relationship and their sex life thrived as a result of the blue lotus practice. And starting to sort of weave in definitely like as a practitioner, my skills of knowing what plant to come in that's going to seep into that person's energy field for them to be like, oh, whoa, there's something to this. And
Mm.
that's the magic of like my practice that I think I'm stepping more into now, is knowing who's receptive and knowing what they're going to be receptive to. And so, and yeah, I've had lots of examples of that happening. And I've also had a lot of, a lot of failures in that too. And so it goes.
Those, and then this
So it goes.
process, yeah.
Yeah.
Have you read much or listened much to Stephen Buhner?
No.
No, you haven't. Okay. I highly recommend his teachings. You must
Cool.
have come across his name at some point.
No, what's he, or what
No?
did he
Okay. Well, so many books. The Secret Teachings of Plants,
write? Okay.
Plant Intelligence in the Imaginal Realms, pretty much like deep Gaia medicine,
Yeah.
to sum it up. But anyway, so you haven't read him. So what I'm going to do, and I'm going to remember to do this, is at the end of our conversation, when I go into production, I'm going to read a story from that he's shared in his talks and his books of him connecting a woman with Angelica. And it's one of the most, every time I read it, I tear up. It's one of the most beautiful stories I've ever heard. And you reminded me of it from what you just shared there. So I'm going to pin that at the end for everyone. Dear listeners, I decided to weave the story in right at this moment as it came up. I personally do not think that it disrupts the flow at all. In fact, I feel it adds a sweetened depth to the conversation. That said, if you'd prefer to skip it, feel free to fast forward about 18 minutes until the conversation picks back up. However, I implore you to tune in to this powerful story and be taken up in its medicinal, magical, and mysterious currents. I don't think you'll regret it. The girl hovered in the doorway, making it a central pivot around which her life's choices circled, half in, half out, uncertain about committing. Hesitant when she entered, I invited her to sit. She chose the blue chair. She perched tensely on its edge as if ready to flee. Her breathing was short and rapid, high in her chest. I offered tea. She said no. She was young, perhaps 28, the lingering baby fat of childhood completely gone, the mature woman's bones in her face struggling to find expression. Her cheeks were drawn, the hollows around her eyes shadowed with pain. The eyes themselves, except when they, with jerky movements, took in my face and the room, were fixed and staring, the pupils contracted. Her clothes were plain, jeans, a workmanlike white shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow, and worn, well-used running shoes. Her hair was a lifeless brown. There is sometimes a porcelain whiteness to the skin of Caucasians, delicate and soft. Life shines through that skin, luminous, like a candle flame glimmering through the tender shade of a lantern. But this young woman's skin was pale, as if never touched by sun, as if lived in darkness and such isolation that all life force had been drained away. It seemed artificial, an untended garment, unalive, unloved, untouched. She was in between the lingering youth of her late 20s and the mature woman that comes into being, perhaps at 35. She was caught between the end of one life and the beginning of the next. And as it is with all life transitions, in that liminal region between one stage of life and another, contractions had begun. They were compressing her, bearing down, demanding she move. But the intangible cervix within her, that is, within all of us, had not yet dilated enough to permit birth. She was lost and afraid. In a barely perceptible monotone, she told me her periods were irregular with intense cramping and heavy bleeding. She said her hands were always cold. Those hands lay on top of her thighs near the knee, palms down, fingers slightly curled. They were pallid and slightly waxy, like the skin of her face, their character only beginning to form. Like many young hands, they were only partially alive, rarely inhabited. Her fingers, those sensitive touching extensions of herself, possessed nails and cuticles that were chewed and torn, as if she were turning inward and tearing away at herself, eating herself alive. The muscles of her forearms were taut, filled with the tension of barely holding on, and occasionally, as we talked, her hands would tighten spasmodically, and finding nothing to grab hold of or no reason to become a fist, they would relax again, but half open, curled, ready. I asked her to tell me more about herself, and she said she was in the midst of a messy divorce, that she couldn't sleep, and while she talked, I noticed she sat slightly hunched over so that her chest was hollowed, as if she were trying to make her breasts smaller, as if she could call them back inside her, make them disappear, as if maybe her shoulders could curl all the way around her then, cover her heart with muscle and bone and strength of arms, as if her heart were weeping and she were trying to comfort it, trying to protect it from the world, from ever being hurt again. I was beginning to breathe shallowly too, my body tensing up, eyes becoming pinpoint focused, when suddenly into my mind came an image, Angelica, and I took a breath and let it all go. I told her there was a plant I thought she should meet, and so we went for a walk. I took my staff, but the sun was warm and the sky clear. I did not need a coat. We cut across the meadow in front of the house, skirting the driveway with its hard-packed gravel, and began wandering down the other side of the ridge. After a while, the slope dropped rapidly, and I angled left, taking us into a gentler sloped ravine, one shaped over time by water running off the ridge. It had silted up over the centuries, becoming a grassy, slightly sloping flood pan with occasional wild rose and spreading prickly thickets of the short matted ceanothus, known as redroot. After 30 yards or so, the ravine spread outward, becoming a broad, open meadow, an aspen grove at its base. The meadow's lower edge was slightly marshy, and here the milkweed grew, butterflies thick among them. Scores of the plants made their home there, taking advantage of water seeping upward from the underground aquifer, itself kept rich by snowmelt from the high ridges of the mountain behind us. We moved carefully through the milkweed, then stepped into that gentle, luminous world that only aspens and their groves create. The air of the grove was thick with aspen's peculiar resinous smell and the hum of bees busy harvesting its sap to line and protect their hives. The small heart-shaped, slightly serrated leaves, even on trees deep within the grove, were moving in the almost imperceptible breeze. They were lightly shaking, almost shivering, in unison, as if they were dancing with some secret joy known only to themselves. I could feel my spirits lift, my feet dance, walking to their secret joy as I moved among them. And I saw the young woman breathe a bit deeper, too. Saw her begin to relax, the gladness of aspens finding its way even into her difficult interior world. Aspen roots are some of the oldest living beings on Earth, over 100,000 years, some of them. But the trees they give birth to remain relatively young. They rarely grow more than a foot to a foot and a half thick before dying back. This grove was a small one, only about 40 feet in diameter, and as we moved down the hill, the bright, dancing light of the aspens soon gave way to the deeper and darker fir forest that lay below. The firs here were much older and larger, perhaps 200 or 300 years of age. Their numbers increased as we walked, the forest thickening around us until the sun's dappled golds only occasionally slanted down through some opening in the overstory. It was darker here, more peaceful, silent, slower, almost mythic in its feeling, as ancient elder forests often are. Our breathing deepened further, and our minds slowed, then calmed, as we took in the trees' sun-quickened, musky scents, as the silence and age of the place penetrated us, as we took on its climate of mind. Soon we neared the small, year-round stream that wove itself through the firs, rocks, and soil at the bottom of the sloping mountainside. Cow parsnip began to appear, big elephant-eared leaves spreading out from strong muscular stalks. Then a profusion of plants, violet and figwort, dogbane and osha, with horsetail and polio mint along the shallows, scattered amidst the rocky sand of the stream. The north-facing slope on the other side of the stream was plant-thick, old, and deeply green. The firs there were tufted with short gray-green growths of the lichen some call usnea. A few more completely enveloped the trees become a few were completely enveloped. The trees become shaggy, shambling green beings, 30 to 50 feet tall. I could feel them stir, wakened from their slow dreaming by the touch of our seeing, the feelings of our hearts for them, by our presence in their midst. Soon we came upon a great rocky outcropping concealed within the gloaming mystery of those ancient trees. It towered over us, 30 or 40 feet high, sides covered with lichen and shadows. At its base grew a tangle of wild roses and mountain mahogany. There was an animal trail at our feet, just this side of the stream. We turned left, moving with it as it followed the twisting and turning of the water. Occasionally, we would happen on huge rotted stumps torn open for grubs by the bear that lived on top of the mountain. Scattered clusters of false Solomon seal covered the ground, dug from the base of the stumps where bear had left them. They were not yet wilted, the roots long, pale, knobby, almost translucent. The trail was only 6 inches or so wide, its soil black and rich, the plants along its length emerald green in that shadowy velvet world. We sank down slightly as we walked, the soil springy, alive, moving in time with us like a trampoline almost. The two of us were held, suspended over its ancient depths like water spiders skating along the surface tension of the soil. And then ahead of us, I caught sight of the unique angelica that grows only here in the high Rocky Mountains. It's unlike any other species of angelica I have known. Angelica was growing on the other side of the stream, snuggled up against the north-facing slope and those ancient firs. It was right at the water's edge, 3 or 4 feet off the trail from where we stood, majestic and stately, vitally alive and deeply feminine, 6 feet tall, perfectly balanced between heaven and earth. I watched closely now to see if what I suspected would in fact occur. The young woman was a step or two ahead of me and slightly to my right. Ducking under a leaning lodgepole pine, she caught a glimpse of the plant from the corner of her eye. She stopped suddenly, as if some invisible hand had laid itself upon her. Then she turned toward it and paused. Something inside shook itself visibly wakened, took breath, and stepped into this world for the first time. She began moving then, almost as if in a dream, feet sleepwalking of their own accord, an invisible force pulling the two of them together. When she came close, her hands began to flutter over the plant's leaves, barely touching, as if they were the body of a lover. She turned her head toward me, eyes questioning. "What is it?" "Angelica," I said. She turned back, hands still fluttering, lightly touching. Then suddenly she paused, took in a shocked, sharpened breath, and said, "It's hollow inside, isn't it? Just like me?" She looked then to see my face. "Yes," I replied. "Yes, it is." Our eyes met, hers expectant, almost hoping. "Ask her to come inside the hollow place. Ask her to come into the hollow place inside you," I said. Then there was a pause, and I watched while she did that thing. She closed her eyes, her breathing slowed, deepened, stopped. There was a moment of waiting, of simple being, then a long, slow, deep breath filled her chest. The curled hollow disappeared. She straightened, her shoulders came back, her breasts reached outward into the world. She stood taller, more balanced, fully erect now. Her skin flushed rose and came alive. The tension in her forearms relaxed, softened, released. She opened her eyes. They were moist and soft-focused, gleaming gently amidst the gloaming of the world. "Oh," she said. "Oh." Her voice filled with wonder. "Now walk a while," I told her. As she did, moving slowly along the stream, her body continued to strengthen, straighten, fill out, mature before my eyes. I watched and saw that in some strange magical way, this plant was teaching her how to become a whole, mature woman. For the first time in my life, I knew with certainty that all of us are born with holes inside us. And those particular holes do not come from wounds given us by our families or our culture or other human beings. They come into the world with us. They are holes that can only be filled by some wild thing from Earth itself. And they each have a particular shape to them, of plant or stone, of tree or bear. They are an emptiness meant to be filled by the kindred beings who companion us on this earth. And without allowing them to take their rightful place within us, we live a half-life, never becoming fully human, never becoming healed or whole or completely who we are, never becoming completely sane. And I wondered then, what will happen to us as a species when we can no longer find these wild places, when the kin with whom we share this planet are gone? What will we do when we alone remain orphaned amidst the shattered world the extractors have left behind them? Long ago I was told, but never really understood, something that the elders of this planet have long said we must remember. In ancient times, when people first came upward out of earth, they were ignorant, without language, without law. The kindred nations who'd emerged long before our species saw and took pity on us, taught us how to be human, taught us language, taught us the law of earth and how to live in harmony with all of life. Over the years, as I have become less ignorant, I have begun to understand what my elders were trying to teach me so very long ago. After a while, the young woman and I walked on. We found another Angelica further down the stream. Then she laid her hands along the leaves of the plant, and saying a prayer for the taking of her life, she asked for Angelica's help in the healing of her body. Then the young woman dug the plant, for it is the root that is most often used for medicine. The root is delicate and somewhat small for such a tall plant. There's a central bulbous tap root, in shape and color something like a parsnip, but smaller, with a whorl of smaller rootlets spreading out to hold the plant stable and upright. The color is tannish, not as white on the exterior as a parsnip. The interior a cream with a sublime smell, indescribably Angelica, aphrodisiacal, human catnip. The young woman kept the root close to her, rubbing her fingers along its sides, periodically lifting it to her nose as we took the long walk back to the house. For a month afterward, she took a tincture of the root, which tastes much as it smells. Her menstrual periods normalized. The painful cramping slowed and stopped. Her body changed, and she changed too, in more ways than I know how to tell. Interestingly, in all the years I have told the story of the young woman, no one has ever asked me what Angelica got from the exchange. Things are, as usual, all about us, but it is crucially important to understand that, as my beloved partner Julie McIntyre once put it, it's their adventure too. They need us, just as we need them. They get something from you and me, and all of us, just as we get something from them. There is an exchange of soul essence, an intimacy that occurs. Something from inside us crosses the distance and enters into them, just as something from them crosses that distance and enters us.
Beautiful.
Let's talk about plant communication, since we're here naturally. You say that speaking with plants is a practice, and learning how to fully integrate their wisdom comes with tuning into their language. You say it takes courage to give the heart what it truly wants. It takes silence to know what the heart truly wants. It takes discipline for the knowing to express itself. And as far as I understand, plant communication and all communication, that the heart is a vital aspect. It's deeply entwined with any meaningful communication. And so I love that you talk about the importance of having the courage to move toward what the heart really wants. And I wonder how you also, how you say discipline, right? It takes discipline. And I'm reminded how, of course, discipline has that root word disciple. And so I'm just wondering about the devotion of your heart and your connection to the heart, and how that influences your capacity to speak with the plants, and also, like, what is it that you're a disciple of at that deep level of the heart, in this growing capacity to communicate with the plant nations. Was that clear?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I feel like, yeah. I feel like I could take it somewhere.
Good. I was unsure of where it was even going at one point, so thank you for picking that up.
Yeah. I mean, plants want to communicate to us. I mean, they have the chemical technology that corresponds to our biochemistry, and so there is a synergistic relationship. And then we have ailments, and then they are remedies for it, which is like a really profound concept to me.
It's profound, but at the same rate, if you see Earth as a living organism, self-organizing system that's been sustaining itself for billions of years, it's like, well, it makes complete and utter sense. I mean,
right.
Wouldn't it be that way?
Yeah.
But profound, especially
Right.
with the way that we were raised. And but please continue.
Exactly. Yeah. I wasn't raised I mean, I was raised getting Tylenol and Advil when I didn't feel well. And I was raised just like not with any herbal wisdom whatsoever in the household. So I was surprised when I was in Chinese medicine school at how effective it was. I kind of thought it was more of a science, but it's completely energetic. And then of course, herbalism has its like full scientific, like, you can study the pharmacology of a plant and why it is good for what it does, which I think is a really potent and beautiful understanding of like the realm and world of botany and biopharmacology is like wildly interesting. And also like, especially from the more indigenous perspective, there's like a spirit behind that plant. And beyond like, okay, so something that's good for the lungs. Yerba Santa was one of the first plants that I felt like I got a very clear transmission from. It's a local the local plant in like a mainly California West Coast, and it dilates the bronchioles. So it's a bronchodilator. It helps you breathe, and it helps clear colds and flus. But I had this like experience of drinking it and feeling the dilation happening and feeling my lungs opening. And I got this deep sensation of relief, and I was feeling a little bit like just I was in a more slumped down emotional space in that time. And I was like, whoa, this plant just gave me the sensation of relief. Like that is the feeling of when you're scared and mom comes and hugs you, you know, this is the feeling of getting like, hey, you are safe. Like you are okay. I got you.
You're cared for. You're
cared for. Yeah. So being alone, drinking on the yerba santa and getting the sensation of relief, I just realized like this is more like, very logical mind would be like, well, it's the bronchodilation increased your oxygen levels and then they made you feel better in your nervous system. Your vagus nerve got regulated. And yes, there is that whole perspective. And you can also say that same thing in a much more poetic way of like, okay, well, I also just drank this herb and I opened my lungs, I opened my chest, I opened my heart to receive love and safety and care, you know? And there's like, both are true at the same time. And so that to me was this experience of like, of just like, it's way deeper than just like knowing what this plant does. It's drinking this plant and feeling what it wants to do to me. And there is like, you know, there are the realm and the quality of adaptogens, but like every plant ultimately has an adaptogenic quality to it, especially when you are drinking the full plant, not an extracted, phytonutrient from that plant. And when you're doing the full spectrum of the plant, there's an intelligence, there's a wisdom, and it's going to like come into the system and work with you. And the more, I mean, obviously high quality, super important. And also just your receptivity as someone consuming this thing, like the more that it's ritualized, intentionalized, and then that bringing into the system, bringing into the body. And so for me, the practice of really receiving from the plants has become this like devotion to wanting to understand them and wanting to understand myself too, because the plants want to bring me in more alignment with myself. And like, ultimately it's this very, reciprocal relationship where I feel like the plant is learning about us through my consciousness, through all of our consciousness. And then I'm also learning from the plants. And so that both the fields are like merging.
Yeah. It's a total paradigm shift from this more extractive, colonized orientation of like, you know, how can I extract the perfect chemical from a plant and mass produce it so that we can control a very specific outcome. And what you're describing is like, actually, there's a way to just deepen into the sincerity of relationship that's being asked of us. And that's going to be living and dynamic and emergent, and you don't know how it's going to go. So it asks for some trust, but it's going to, if you're in real rooted reciprocal relationship with these living beings, it's going to lead somewhere beautiful. That's what happens. That's what happens through reciprocal relationship. You know, more resilience, more beauty, more integration, more mutual aid and care comes out of that relationship. So I love that shift in paradigm, and I think it's so important. And I also saw that you said that, and this ties into what we were just talking about. You said nature is not polite; it is sincere.
Yeah.
It is sincerity that creates reciprocity.
Yeah. That was a deep one for me, realizing that, because nature is also vicious and you could go take the wrong plant and die immediately.
Or get eaten ass first, Ryan or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It gets real. I mean, I hung out in the Amazon for a couple of weeks and I was scared shitless. Like I was terrified. And so, it wasn't this lovely, like inviting place. I mean, I was getting
but what's amazing about that is that's respect, right? Like I know that you're also involved in psychedelic healing medicine as well. And it's like, for me personally, and I think for any sane human, that you come to those experiences with great respect,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
If you're not a little bit scared, you probably don't know what you're really getting into.
Yeah, totally.
But I think that that's just like our relationship with the wild in general. Like, if you don't have a healthy respect and a rooted fear that's real and reverent, you're not going to be able to humble yourself enough to, I guess, come into right relationship, because it's not all just out for our good, and it's not all out for our idealized outcome, for our egoic understanding of what our life is supposed to be. Like, Earth is way more wild than that. And part of its wildness is death, decay, eating itself, composting itself. And we're very much a part of that process, of course.
Yeah. Yeah. So there is, I feel like as someone that is, I kind of, let's see, like I breathe a lot of like life and color and beauty into communicating with plants. I think there's also, it's really important to understand, like, yeah, that respect for, it's not all just like rainbows and transmissions and downloads. It's, there's also, yeah, like sharpness and thorns. I dieted with Rose and I was all thorns. Like, I could not believe how sharp she was. And yeah, and so there is like I that constant reminder, that constant humility we fall into, life just lifing, and challenges just coming always. And like being in Topanga when the fires came and getting kicked out of my home, and like it's there was this like, but yeah, I had this deep respect for that invitation that was this invited me into like leaving, flying away from the nest and being like, okay, like what else is out there? And just like completely shift my perspective of what actually matters. So yeah, I really feel like that kind of sincerity of nature is the lesson. And it's not just this kind of like, it's not yielding for us at all. And yeah, and I mean, that also particular quote came as a result of people, like, I'm just noticing like these sort of polite sayings people say like often, and
Such as, do you have one?
yeah, well, just someone being like, oh, I don't know, like finishing maybe something. I forgot. Like I'm not a good musician. I've been learning music, and I'm like just starting to open my voice and all of these things. And like I remember like sharing a song, and someone was like, that was really beautiful. And like it wasn't beautiful. Like
Okay.
it felt like, I don't know, it was kind of just
I know what you say. I know what you're saying. So, and you're talking about niceties, right? This sense of like being nice rather than kind is kind of in that way, like being nice rather than sincere and honest, but loving. Yeah.
Right. And we can be, I mean, yeah, I think there was like somebody else too was just like, oh, I can, like, how long have you been playing? And like, I'm like, yeah, I'm just starting. And so that conversation to me felt like authentic and sincere. And I'm like, good for you for like putting yourself out there. And like, and even though my little girl wanted the validation of like, that was good, but like, that to me, that conversation felt very real and raw and true. While the other one of just someone just like, even her mannerisms, her face, everything about her was just like, I felt like she felt obligated to tell me that because she was probably empathic and feeling that my little girl needed that. So there is this, there is this kind of like, how many times are we doing that throughout the day? I mean, as an empathic, person, and I have my people pleaser qualities of like, I can feel what I know if somebody wants me to say, and breaking out of that was recognizing nature's like viciousness and being like, I learned the best lessons with like sharp truth, and like, and it can always come with grace, and it can always come with compassion. But yeah, like that to me was kind of nature's reminder of like that just sincerity has really taught me to just be really like impeccable with my word and honest, and despite how confronting that honesty might be. So that was like that, where that transmission kind of came from.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Yeah, there's such an importance to be placed on the, like you said, the ferocity, the fierce grace of life. and that's actually like such an important, vital thread of evolution and life affirming change and collaboration. And I love that you're connecting it to sincerity, and like the less sincere you are and the less you understand what sincerity even is to you, um, kind of the less you're going to really grow and bloom into who you're here to be, you
Yeah.
know, and you're not going to facilitate others
Yeah.
blooming either. So then it's like, what are you doing? You're kind of lost, which isn't a bad thing, but like pay attention to sincerity. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love this call to action.
Yeah. And politeness to me is sort of the default programming,
Right,
you
right,
know,
right.
that we've just been told. Say
Yeah.
thank you, when like I just even remember being a little girl and being
Yes.
to like say thank you or be nice to someone that I didn't want to say thank you or be nice to.
Right, rather than just like supporting the natural reciprocal gravity that earthlings feel to
Yeah.
give thanks for things that give them life,
Yeah.
right? It's such a
Yeah.
different orientation. Like
Totally.
say thank you because you're supposed to, because that's polite. It's like, no, just like pay attention to how life gives you life and
Yeah.
then be grateful for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I want to share a quote here, and it's actually by Stephen Buhner because when I was preparing for this conversation, I couldn't help but think about him. And I have this extensive document of quotes from all kinds of people. And I have a big section with Buhner because I've read all of his books and I love him so much. And so I want to bring him in here and see what comes alive for you. I think it's a lot of what we've been talking about, so maybe it's just a transition moment, but I wanted to share it. He says that one of our greatest fears is to eat the wildness of the world. Our mothers intuitively understood something essential. The green is poisonous to civilization. If we eat the wild, it begins to work inside us, altering us, changing us. Soon, if we eat too much, we will no longer fit the suit that has been made for us. Our hair will begin to grow long and ragged. Our gait and how we hold our body will change. A wild light begins to gleam in our eyes. Our words start to sound strange, non-linear, emotional, unpractical, poetic. Once we have tasted this wildness, we begin to hunger for a food long denied us, and the more we eat of it, the more we will awaken. How does that land for you?
I feel like it's my life story.
I love that answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um I think about, I feel like fear is an interesting one because I've kind of recently realized, what's the fear of something that is going to like your intuitive hit that like you should not do this versus a fear of something that's like going to invite a breakthrough.
Mm, mm,
And
yeah,
discerning between the two, like, because my intuition, it's like riddled, it has been riddled with fear, and like I'm like, I don't know if I'm meant to not do this, and I've realized that if the thing in which I'm fearing isn't dangerous, I should probably do it.
mm,
And not to say that something that is dangerous I should do, but that is like a
yeah,
golden rule of thumb that I think I've realized recently, of like, if
yeah.
the thing that I'm fearing is not dangerous, do it.
Yeah.
And
So could you just, in line with that, could you define what dangerous is?
I guess like life threatening, or it can physically hurt me, like maybe I'm thinking of jumping off a high cliff into water, and something inside of me is like, if I saw somebody else doing it, if I saw 10 people doing it, that's validating, okay, this isn't dangerous. You're just scared. But if no one's doing it and I don't know, and I'm in a foreign land, like maybe this isn't like, I could
Mhm,
potentially get hurt. And so
mhm.
like, yeah, just kind of discerning between the two. And so, I feel
Well,
like
that's a
this,
really courageous way of looking at it, though, because basically what you're saying is like, if it's not life threatening, then it's worth going toward.
yeah.
right? And when we think about so many like psychological disorders and shit, so many of them are based really in a fear of how you're being perceived socially, psychosocially, things like that. And so
Yeah.
what you're saying is if it has anything to do with that, go toward it.
Yeah. Yeah. Which me sharing music is that. I mean, I'm so scared. If I'm in a public situation and someone's like, share the song you just learned, like I am shaking. I have nerves. Every part of my
Mhm.
being is like, oh no, like I have nothing to contribute. I have nothing to share. I
Mhm.
suck. But then it's like, okay, well, if I fumble, if I fall on my face, I'm gonna be okay. Like,
Yeah.
play the song, there's nothing that on the other side of this that is anything dangerous. And the only danger is my ego being
Mm.
somebody being like, oh, she's bad, and then that hurting my ego. But like,
Mm.
that's the exact thing that we need to push for.
Mhm.
I feel so.
Mhm.
Yeah, I felt like that quote was kind of just like the essence of that thing of like this sort of idea of like like that wild green is like it's not dangerous. It's just this facade of danger. It's this
Mhm.
like it's this conditioning of danger.
Mhm.
So yeah, to go in and like and consume it, on the other side of that, you have liberation.
Yeah. But the liberation comes at a cost, like
Yeah,
what he talks about. He specifically says it's dangerous to civilization.
yeah,
And in other ways, at different times, he talks about that this work of becoming vegetalista, is what he calls it, is to become barbarian. And he describes it as going beyond the pale of civilization, going out into the wildness of the hinterlands, where the civilized, tamed sense of self can actually kind of dissolve and be touched by the livingness of the world. But a part of that being barbarian, right? Even when I say that word, you're like, oh, they're not of us,
yeah,
To be barbarian is to be long-haired and ragged and different gait and a different speech that's maybe not intelligible to the
yeah.
civilized folk. So I wonder, could you speak to that? Have you noticed that in your life? That the deeper you go with the plants and the wildness of your being and earth, that there is this sacrifice of
Yeah.
feeling connected to the civilized, to say it simply.
Yeah. This is a really real inner conflict that I'm navigating right now.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm. Do
Yeah.
you feel okay to talk about it a bit?
Really. Yeah. It's nothing that I'm ashamed of. It just feels very real. It feels really alive. I just was on the Big Island in farmland for 2 months, just getting like my hands in the mud every single day, planting trees, learning about, yeah, just like some really cool successive sort of farming techniques. Yeah, and then I also have this like life in LA, and I have clients, and I have this professional sort of um,
Mm,
just this whole professional side of my clinical practice and all of that. And then also I have like my community here, and there are all these like, people that have epic podcasts and entrepreneurs and started companies, and like they're like my community here is a really rad network, and everyone's doing really cool things. And then, then there's just this part of me that feels called to the wild and called to go spend time with the plants. And it's there are people in that wild context, and there is community there, but it is like it's a much like simpler life.
mhm,
um I find the conversations to be a little bit less like stimulating. The
mm,
financial
mm,
situation of that context isn't as abundant. And then, I thread back into my life here in Southern California, and I'm being like reminded of like the abundance, the structure, the growth. But then, yeah, then I meet these people that are living in the more like rural farm, small community life. And yeah, I don't know where I want to go from here. I'm in the listening. I'm about to go 2 months dieta, sit in silence, sit with the plants, and really feel. But I do feel this calling. It's funny you say the word vegetalista, because part of my intention of doing this dieta is to step into the role of a vegetalista.
mm,
And um So I'm like on this journey. I think it's so perfect that you read that quote just for my own
Oh,
personal
good,
what I'm
good.
doing. But I think a lot of us are I feel like a lot of us are going, it's that like, do I live in the country? Do I live in the city?
Yeah,
Do I live like, do I do this off grid, full like food sovereign, water sovereign life? Or, it's also very luxurious having the city and the life that I have here too. And I
yeah.
don't know what the answer is. I really don't.
And I would suggest that it maybe isn't about answers or arrivals, but it's about just like being willing and courageous, as you've already shown, to just to wade out into the messy middle of it, and
Yeah.
to listen deeply enough to be willing to be changed by
Yeah.
what you hear and what you feel. And I don't think it's any coincidence that there's so many people in this conflict. And
Hmm.
I think something important to remember is really a shift from ego identity to eco identity.
Yeah.
Because from my perspective, I think that this calling that many of us are sensing and struggling with to go a bit more wild isn't just ours. Like, it is in that it's a part of our soul's knowing, and that's why it's so difficult to really like understand and turn toward, especially being so embedded in the civilizational structure. But I think that it's not just ours in the sense that it's the intelligence of the land and the plants and
Yeah.
earth beckoning certain folks. I think probably many folks, but only certain folks are really like listening enough to be moved naturally. And so it's this beckoning from earth to like, hey, like, what are your roots really?
Yeah.
What does it mean to be like actually rooted as an earthling? Can you pay a bit more attention to that? And that naturally draws us into more wild spaces, because you just can't be rooted in an earthen way in the middle of Los Angeles or in a cityscape. That's just not how it goes, right? So there's this tension.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do. In this era of over information, like we have so much access to information all the time. And now we're getting like sentient level AI to like, people are asking very personal life questions. And, I'm not against it, I'm not for it. I maintain a neutral perspective on it. But I am finding that the more there is this external like outlet of asking questions and finding answers, there is like the forgetting to kind of look
Mm,
within and sit within. And I find that the plants are like, don't forget about us.
mm,
Like, don't forget that you can sit with a cup of rose, or you can sit with a cup of even green tea. And Camellia sinensis, which is the tea plant, was the plant that generated so much of the Chinese wisdom around this like plant herbalism, and it's a master teacher. And we have these master teacher plants, things like the psychedelic realm and the entheogens are master plants, but even the like rose, blue lotus, Camellia sinensis, the tea plant, coffee plant are all very powerful, powerful teachers. And to sit and so like for me, the practice is to just sit and with these teachers and have counsel with the earth,
mm,
because as my guide to make whatever decision. And oftentimes it's like, it might not be like a long-term sort of what I'm doing, but they're guiding me from one place to the next. That tends to just lead to me exactly to where I need to go.
yeah.
um, and I
Yeah.
feel like, yeah, I feel that this is kind of like people are remembering this way of counseling the earth. And also there's like a hyper separation too because of technology. And yeah, one of my biggest like visions and goals of just like what I want to create and the offerings I produce are to help people remember that they can just sit with a cup of tea, and that water is deeply structured with intention, and then the plant is deeply structured, and then that infused in the water, and you're really taking in this information.
Mm,
So and we have access to that. Like, to me, that is like the ultimate intelligence,
mm,
way better than any AI that can offer.
mm-hmm. I agree with you. Absolutely. Because as far as I understand, AI is complicated, but it's not complex in the way that living systems are, right? And so like coming into a complex relationship with a living being, with the medium of water, like that's inherently emergent
Right.
and innovative. It's creative, right? Whereas AI, as far as I understand at this point, isn't that. And technology has never been that. It's just been creating more complicated systems, which have actually weighed us down, and
Mm.
I think depressed our capacity to even feel the truth
Yeah.
and to be called into right action. So it's turning toward the livingness of the world and living relationships and the complexity and emergence there that I think is going to allow us to access a deeper wisdom. Yeah.
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 Beautiful. Okay. We're at the end here. I have one more question. What is something that, like, in your, and you have this beautiful unique niche that you're filling in this world, but kind of in that general realm, what is something that's not being talked enough about that you really want? Like, maybe you don't even understand it yet, but you have an inkling, or you do understand it, but something that you feel like you want to hear more conversation around, and that actually feels really important and maybe difficult for you.
It's a really good question. Yeah, I definitely feel what's coming up right now is the essence of the conversation we were carrying of like, where do we go from here? Where do I go from here? And while there is no answers, I guess it's like I think about community and I think about community relationships. And I often think about how we were tribal, community based humans. And then we went to the nuclear family. And then we were like severe separation.
Mm.
And to me, I'm very curious about what traumatized us so
Mm.
much from the community mindset to the individual family unit mindset. And where, like, what was that? And I think that there was a lot of government kind of intention of doing that. But the reason why I'm so curious about that is because I have, in the last decade of my life, really devoted myself to living in community. And it's really challenging and really exhausting. And even, in the farm situation I was in Hawaii, there's just so many layers of complexity of the finances and who's doing what and who's got the workload. And
Mhm.
yeah, I'm just like, I feel like just conversations around not just like, oh, this is the system that's going to work, but more so of like, what are the pain points that we're really dealing with? Because so we can at least just put that on the table to have the open discussion. And there isn't this facade of that, like, oh yeah, I know about like a community compound in Costa Rica where they're like growing a bunch of fruits and it's like, it's perfect. And like, we should do that same thing too. Like, I want to have like the
Mm.
real raw conversations of like, what are the challenges? And yeah, it'd just be cool to see a little bit more of like the angle of kind of like problem solution around the what it means to live on land in community.
Mhm. Mhm. So important. Yeah. Do you mind if I speak to some things?
Please,
Yeah.
yeah.
Because this is a topic that I talk about often. I've been hosting a group council session weekly for many moons now, and this just naturally comes up a lot in different ways. And so I've thought about it a lot, and I've sought out teachers speaking on this too, and I've lived kind of in some little community moments, and so I have my own experience as well. And I'll try and summarize my thoughts around it and see if there's anything meaningful for you to wrap up in your heart cloth and take with you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when I think about our ancestors all the time too, how couldn't you, when so much of our development is rooted in that ancestral way of living, which wasn't a one size fits all, and that's really important. And you were speaking to that too. It was dynamic, it was emergent with the elements of a specific place and people. Now there are patterns though, right, that make us human, and I think some of those patterns are intrinsically missing in almost every intentional community. And I'll try to speak to a couple of them. Like one of them is that there isn't a shared cultural context, right? So many of these communities are people coming together from fragmented cultural contexts and then and then being like, well, what's our culture? It's like, damn, I mean, you don't have the roots of that. So like, I think it's kind of immature to even think that you could just like forge a culture together. You know what I mean? I think it can happen, but I don't think it's going to happen in our lifetime, right? So like maybe your grandchildren will actually inherit some kind of rooted culture. So that's part of the issue, is we're seeking something that I personally think can't actually be sought in this lifetime. And I think there's some medicine in that, because it allows us to kind of humble ourselves and have compassion with the process and realize like the outcome we're seeking probably isn't attainable. And so then by letting go of that, I think that more intelligence can flow into the system, right? Is what we were talking about, complicated versus complex. We're inheriting all these colonial, hierarchical, complicated, institutional, psychological structures, and we're trying to rework them, to fit this ideal that we hope for. But I think that Earth has always organized systems, including human communities, around landscape. And so people are trying to come into land and go, I'm going to create a regenerative food forest, which is amazing, right? And there tends to be, in my experience, this kind of colonial orientation of like, we know what this land wants. We're going to create the ideal system here because we have the knowledge, rather than this more humble stance of like, the land knows what it needs. And if we can attune to that, then maybe we'll be able to hear and move with that need. So I think that's an issue too in many scenarios. I have more thoughts around it, but it's that. One more thing is also elders. And this is tied into that cultural rooting theme I brought up. But like, we don't have elders in the way that we used to.
Yeah.
And not only human elders, but like trees, for example. And you think about how important forests were for so many of our ancestors, and the teachings of forests and landscapes. Like even the prairies in the United States and in Canada, they're not even prairies anymore. They've been totally altered. So even the deep elder intelligence of a living wild grassland, that's not there in that same way. That elder spirit has been corroded, disrupted. The elder trees have been cut down. So I think that's an issue too, is that landscapes always organized us. They birthed mythology through us that we could then create culture with and live in right relationship. But those landscapes were also ancient and had elder spirits in them, and I think we've done just such an incomprehensible harm by the amount of disruption we've as a species have done to living landscapes. So much. It's such a huge topic, but I'll just stop there. But my thoughts.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and that's kind of why I feel why I'm kind of like down at ground zero of just like, I'm just going to listen to what the plants have to say. And I do think about we had like the baby boomer generation to really confront us with aging and dementia, and now we are in like this sort of, a lot of the people that we know, it's like this realm of like biohacking and longevity and vitality. And it's like, for me, it's way deeper than just like looking good when I'm older. It's like, I want to be an elder, and yeah. And kind of taking one, I feel like a lot of our generation has taken one for the team of just like a lot of healing of the generational trauma, and a lot of just like macheting through creating some sort of path somewhere for our children, or yeah, next generations. So for me, the culture that I feel like I can really generate in this lifetime for myself, first generation American too, so it's like I really come from like a blank slate. And yeah, for me it really feels like an opportunity to create and generate like what a culture is. And like for me, it's like listening to the earth and teaching that. And maybe it is like a very basic level system, and we're not going to establish a beautiful community compound that's going to create a legacy, but at least it's going to create that mindset that will turn into something great.
Yeah. Like the legacy is the stories, I think. It's like, I saw Sophie Strand. She's this amazing author, and I saw she wrote something the other day. I'm going to butcher it, but I love the essence of it. It's something like, civilizations won't always always able to cross the wide open oceans, but stories always will. It's the sense that like the stories and the tending to mythological wisdom is what actually is going to make it through whatever kind of death, decay, and renewal cycles are on the horizon. And so focusing so much on the infrastructure of it, in like a outward physical way, particularly in the sense of like intentional communities, like that's important. But if that's the mission, I think we're missing the more important threads that are actually going to infuse later generations with that living wisdom that can, live in right relationship, essentially. Okay, we're at the end here. Thank you so much for this incredible journey. It's been so beautiful, and I just want to share a quote here, because you said, "I want to be an elder," and I agree. Like, I think that's always, up until very recently, been the prayer that humans have carried, is just to learn how to be a good elder. That's what life was for, so that we could then give back to the children and the land, and then we could allow those stories to carry forward in a good way. And I was reading this book. It's called The Wisdom of Native Americans, and it's just these quotes, all from men, interestingly, but just these quotes from indigenous leaders from the late 19th century. And I came across this quote the other day, and this talk of eldership reminded me. So it's from Winnebago Lesson. He says, try to do so Winnebago Lesson, so it'd be a lesson of the people. So it's not even from a particular person. It's an understanding of the Winnebago people, okay? It says, try to do something for your people, something difficult. Have pity on your people and love them. If a man is poor, help him. Give him and his family food. Give them whatever they ask for. If there is discord among your people, intercede. Take your pipe and walk into their midst. Die, if necessary, in your attempt to bring about reconciliation. Then, when order has been restored and they see you lying dead on the ground, still holding in your hand the sacred pipe, the symbol of peace and reconciliation, then assuredly they will know that you have been a real chief.
Wow.
Yeah. All right. Nadia. Is there anything you want to say to tie this conversation together?
No, I just deeply appreciate your questions and presence and insights. Thank you.
It was truly a pleasure and an honor, and I'm really grateful to have had the opportunity.